My name is Sarah, and I gave almost 24 years of my life to a company that only realized my value after I was already gone. The call came on an ordinary afternoon while I was driving out west, hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the building where I had spent most of my adult life. My phone rang. I looked down and saw my old supervisor's name. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I answered. Hello. His voice was cheerful. Too cheerful. Hi, Sarah. Good news. We're reopening, and we're calling you back. I smiled before I even meant to, because for him, it was good news. For him, it meant the company was waking up again. The desks would fill. The phones would ring. The same people would return to the same chairs and pretend the last few months had only been a pause. But for me, everything had changed. So I said, bad news. I'm out west. There was a silence. Then he said slowly, okay, when will you be back? That was the moment. After years of swallowing disrespect, years of being talked down to, years of watching toxic managers get rewarded while good workers burned out, I finally had the answer I had never been brave enough to give before. I won't be. The silence on the other end was beautiful. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because for the first time, he understood that he had no control over me. No office, no schedule, no company badge, no supervisor title, no condescending tone, nothing. For nearly 24 years, that company assumed I would always be there. They thought loyalty meant I would return no matter how they treated me. They were wrong. What my supervisor didn't know was that COVID had done what I had never been able to do by myself. It gave me distance. It gave me time. It gave me a chance to see my life from outside the cage. And once I saw it clearly, I knew one thing for sure. I was not coming back. Welcome to dramatic revenge. I started working at that company the year it opened. Back then, I was younger, hopeful, and still believed hard work protected people. I believed if you showed up early, stayed late, kept your head down, helped your coworkers, and never made trouble, people would respect you. That was my first mistake. The company was toxic almost from the beginning, but not in a way that made people run immediately. It was the slow kind of toxic, the kind that hides behind phrases like, that's just how he is, or don't take it personally, or, you know how management can be. In a small town, steady jobs were not easy to find. So I stayed. 1 year became 5. 5 became 10. 10 became almost 19. I worked in the same department for nearly 2 decades. Supervisors changed. Managers changed. Rules changed. But one thing stayed the same. The workers carried the company while management took the credit. I became dependable. At first, I was proud of that. People came to me when they didn't know how to fix something. New employees asked me questions. Managers dropped problems on my desk because they knew I would solve them. But in a toxic workplace, dependable doesn't always mean respected. Sometimes it means used. I was the woman who stayed late. The woman who fixed mistakes quietly. The woman who trained people who later got promoted over her. The woman who was expected to absorb pressure because she always had before. Then came the supervisor and manager who made everything worse. They were arrogant, cliquey, and openly disrespectful to women. They didn't just lead badly. They enjoyed making people feel small. In meetings, they interrupted women constantly. If I suggested something, it was ignored. If a male coworker repeated it 10 minutes later, suddenly it was brilliant. They spoke to us like children. They laughed at complaints. They created favorites and outsiders. And somehow, no matter how many people suffered, head office kept pretending not to see it. Every morning, I sat in my car before walking in and gave myself the same speech. Just get through today. Just get through this week. Just get through this year. I didn't know it then, but that sentence was stealing my life one day at a time. The worst part about bad bosses is not always what they do in public. It is what they teach everyone else to accept. After those two took over, the entire department changed. People stopped speaking freely. Conversations ended when management walked in. Women exchanged looks across the room because sometimes that was safer than saying what we were really thinking. My supervisor had a way of making every question sound stupid. If I asked for clarification, he sighed. If another woman raised a concern, he smirked. If we pushed back, we were emotional. If we stayed quiet, we were not engaged. There was no winning. The manager was worse in a quieter way. He smiled while allowing it. He acted professional while rewarding the same behavior. He pretended to be neutral, but somehow the same people always benefited from his neutrality. There were cliques inside the department, and if you were not in one, you knew it. They had inside jokes. They had private meetings. They shared information selectively, then blamed people for not knowing things. I watched good employees shrink. I watched women who were smart and capable second-guess themselves until they barely spoke. I watched coworkers cry in the bathroom, then dry their faces and return to their desks like nothing had happened. And I stayed, not because I was weak, because I had bills, because I had responsibilities, because in a small town, quitting a job without another one lined up is not courage. Sometimes it is financial suicide. So I survived. I learned which tone of voice meant trouble. I learned when to answer and when to stay silent. I learned to document things without looking like I was documenting things. And I learned something else too. The company did not care how people were treated as long as the work got done. That realization changed me. I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped hoping someone from above would fix it. I stopped believing years of loyalty would protect me. Still, I wanted out. For a long time, I looked for openings. Anything that would move me away from that department. Then one day, after almost 19 years of surviving the same building, a position opened in another department. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a promotion, but it was a door, and I was desperate enough to walk through it quietly before anyone could lock it. I applied for the transfer without announcing it. I knew better than to give toxic people advance notice of my escape. People like that do not always block you directly. Sometimes they damage your reputation first. They make one little comment. They describe you as difficult. They say you are good at your job, but follows you into rooms you have never entered. So I kept quiet. I filled out the paperwork. I waited. When I got the transfer, I sat in my car after work and cried. Not loud crying. Not dramatic crying. Just relief. For the first time in nearly 19 years, I had a way out. My new department felt different from the first week. My supervisor was kind. My manager was calm. They explained things instead of using confusion as a weapon. They treated questions like part of the job, not personal insults. Nobody talked down to me. Nobody laughed at me. Nobody made me feel like being a woman meant I had to work twice as hard to be believed. For 5 years, I loved my job. I cannot overstate what that meant. After years of dreading work, I started waking up without that heavy feeling in my chest. I came home with energy. I laughed more. My husband noticed. Even my body felt different. That department reminded me that I was not the problem. The problem had been the environment. Good leadership can make people bloom. Bad leadership can make strong people forget who they are. For 5 years, I bloomed. Then my supervisor announced she had found another job. I was happy for her. Truly. But when she told us, my stomach tightened. Then my manager left too. Again, I was happy for him. He deserved better. But I knew the company. I knew what happened when good people left. Bad people moved in. A few weeks later, the announcement came by email. My old supervisor and manager were being moved into my new department. I read the message 3 times. Then I just sat there. The people I had escaped were coming back. Not as co-workers. Not as visitors. As my bosses. That was the day I realized the company had not changed. It had only given me 5 years to forget how cruel it could be. At first, I tried to be reasonable. I told myself maybe they had changed. Maybe time had softened. Maybe a new department had forced them to be. But hope lasted less than a minute. The old habits meetings became tense again. Conversations became careful again. Women were interrupted again. The same favorites were created. The same people were excluded. The same smug little comments returned, dressed up as management humor. Only this time I was older. And tired. I no longer had the energy to perform loyalty for people who had never earned it. So I did something different. I stopped trying to be liked. I did my job. That was all. I came in, handled my work, helped where I needed to, and went home. The funny thing was, they needed me more in that department than they wanted to admit. Our work mattered to head office. It was one of those departments that people ignored until something went wrong. And then suddenly everyone wanted answers immediately. I knew the systems. I knew the history. I knew where the problems usually started. I knew what to fix before management even understood what was broken. They may not have respected me, but they relied on me, and that created a quiet little balance. They could be rude. They could be cliquey. They could make me feel unwanted, but they could not pretend I was useless. Still, Every day under them took something from me. I began counting the years until retirement, then hated myself for doing it. I did not want my life to become a waiting room. I did not want to spend the rest of my working years enduring people who made kindness feel rare. But leaving still felt impossible. Where would I go? What would I do? How would we manage? Then COVID hit. The world changed in ways none of us saw coming. The company closed. People were sent home. For the first time in decades, that building no longer had control over my mornings. At first, I thought the shutdown was another disaster. I didn't know it was going to become my way out. When the company closed, everyone was scared. Nobody knew how long it would last. Nobody knew who would be called back. Nobody knew whether the company would survive. I stayed on a little longer than most because my role was still needed. That part was almost funny. After years of being treated like I was replaceable, suddenly I was important enough to keep around a little longer. But eventually, even I was placed on layoff. I remember the first morning I woke up and did not have to go anywhere. No alarm, no commute, no supervisor, no forced smile, no walking into a building where the air felt heavy before anyone even spoke. At first, I was anxious. Then I felt relief. Deep relief. The kind you do not notice immediately because your body is so used to tension that peace feels suspicious. My husband noticed before I did. One morning he looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." I laughed, but he was right. I was lighter. Not because life was perfect. Not because money was no concern. But because I was no longer spending 40 hours a week inside a place that drained me. Our kids lived out west, and they were about to have babies. Grandbabies. A beautiful word. My husband and I had always talked about taking the camper across the country. It had been one of those dreams couples mention for years, but keep postponing because work, bills, routines, and responsibilities always come first. Now work had stopped. The world had paused. And for once, there was no reason not to go. So we packed up the camper. At first, we told ourselves it was temporary. Just a trip. Just a visit. Just something to do until the company reopened. But the further we drove, the more I felt the old life loosening its grip. Every mile west felt like breathing room. By the time we reached our children, something inside me had already started to change. I had spent years thinking I was trapped. But sometimes the door has been unlocked for a long time. You just need life to push you hard enough to open it. The West did something to me. It wasn't just the landscape, though that was beautiful. It was the space, the distance, the feeling that my old life could no longer reach me as easily. My husband and I spent hours driving and talking. Not the tired conversations people have after work when both of them are drained. Real conversations. The kind you have when there is road ahead, coffee in the cup holder, and no supervisor waiting for you on Monday. We talked about our children. We talked about the babies coming. We talked about the house back east. We talked about how much of our life had been organized around one company. Then the grandbabies arrived. Holding my grandchild for the first time changed everything. There are moments that do not ask your permission before rearranging your priorities. That was one of them. I looked at that tiny face and thought about all the years I had given to people who would replace me without blinking. Then I looked at my family and realized these were the people who actually mattered. The company suddenly felt far away. The toxic bosses felt small. The fear of starting over began to feel smaller too. One evening, my husband and I sat outside the camper after visiting the kids. The air was cool. The sky was wide. We were quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Do you want to go back?" I knew he did not mean for a visit. I knew what he was really asking. I looked at him and said, "No." He nodded. "I don't either." That was the beginning of the real decision. We drove back east, but not to return to our old life. We went back to end it. We sold the house. We sold furniture. We sold tools, decorations, extra dishes, things that had sat in closets for years waiting for a future we no longer wanted. Every sale felt like cutting a rope. People asked questions. Some understood. Some didn't. But I no longer needed everyone to understand. We packed what mattered and let go of what didn't. The company was still closed, so my bosses had no idea how final everything had become. And that made the next part even better. Before we left for good, I stopped by the company to collect my personal things from the office. The building was still mostly closed, so it felt strange walking through those halls. For years, that place had felt unavoidable, permanent, like gravity. Now it looked smaller than I remembered. The same walls, the same desks, the same tired carpet, the same smell of old coffee and paperwork. But I was not the same woman walking through it. I reached my desk and opened the drawers. A sweater, a mug, some pens, a few notes, little pieces of a life I had spent years building around a company that never deserved that much space in my heart. As I packed, my supervisor appeared. He looked comfortable there, as if nothing had changed. "So," he said, "when we start up again, you're coming back, right?" For a second, I almost told him everything. I almost said, "Actually, we sold the house. We're moving west. I'm not coming back to you, this department, or this company." But I didn't. Maybe I didn't want the conversation. Maybe I didn't know him that much information. Maybe some quiet part of me wanted him to enjoy the assumption a little longer. So I smiled politely and said, "Of course." He looked satisfied. That look told me everything. He believed I was still the same employee. Still dependable. Still available. Still waiting to be called back whenever the company decided it needed me again. I carried my box out of the building without correcting him. Outside, I sat in my car for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel. I expected sadness. After all, I had spent almost 24 years tied to that place. But sadness never came. What I felt was distance. Clean, beautiful distance. I started the car and drove away. I did not look back. At the time, I had not officially resigned yet. But emotionally, I was already gone. 3 months later, my supervisor would call me with his cheerful little good news. And I would finally give him the answer he had earned. A few months passed after we moved west permanently. I was enjoying my family. I was spending time with the babies. I had not found a new job yet, but for once, I was not panicking. Selling the house had given us breathing room. And peace had given me something even better. Clarity. I realized I did not miss the company. Not the building. Not the routine. Not the stress. Not the toxic bosses. Not the constant feeling that I had to prove my worth to people determined not to see it. Then my phone rang. My supervisor's name appeared on the screen. I knew before I answered. The company was reopening. I picked up. "Hello." His voice was bright. "Hi, Sarah. Good news. We're reopening and calling you back." There it was. The sentence he thought would pull me back across the country. The sentence he thought I had been waiting to hear. The sentence that assumed my life had been paused until the company needed me again. I looked at the road in front of me and smiled. "Well," I said, "bad news. I'm out west." Silence. Then he said, "When will you be back?" I said, "I won't be." He said nothing, and I let the silence sit. For almost 24 years, I had filled uncomfortable silences for other people. I had softened bad news. I had made things easier. I had explained myself before anyone asked. Not this time. He finally started stumbling through questions. "What do you mean?" "I mean I moved." "You moved?" "Yes." "Moved temporarily?" "No. Permanently." Another pause. I could hear him trying to rearrange the facts into something he could control. But there was nothing to control. The house was sold. Our old life was packed away. I was not coming back. I told him calmly that I would send in my resignation. Then I ended the call. I didn't shout. I didn't insult him. I didn't list every terrible thing he had done. I didn't need to. Sometimes the strongest revenge is not an argument. Sometimes it is a boundary. I sent my resignation shortly after. Short, professional, final. Then I put my phone down and sat there smiling like someone had opened a door inside my chest. For the first time in almost 24 years, that company could no longer call me back. A few days later, one of my former coworkers called me. She was still working there, and I could hear the excitement in her voice before she even told me why. "You should have seen him," she said. Apparently, after my resignation became official, my supervisor flipped out. Not quietly. Not professionally. He lost it. He started asking people if they had known I wasn't coming back. "Did you know she moved? Did you know she sold her house? Did anyone know about this?" Of course, everyone acted innocent. Nobody wanted to be the person standing too close to his anger. But I could imagine the scene perfectly. The same man who had spent years talking down to women was now standing in the office, angry because one of those women had made a decision without asking his permission. That was the part that satisfied me. Not his anger. His surprise. He had assumed I would return, because I always had before. He had assumed the company could call, and I would answer. He had assumed dependability meant ownership. He was wrong. My coworker told me the department struggled after that. There were things I had handled quietly for years that suddenly became visible when I was gone. That happens often in workplaces. A good employee prevents disasters so smoothly that management forgets disasters wherever possible. Then the employee leaves, and suddenly everyone realizes how much invisible work was being done. I won't pretend I didn't enjoy hearing that. But the real victory was not their struggle. The real victory was my peace. Eventually, I found a new job. A good one. With a good company. The difference shocked me at first. People spoke respectfully. Managers listened. Questions were answered without sarcasm. Hard work was appreciated instead of exploited. For a while, I kept waiting for the bad part to appear. It didn't. Slowly, I relaxed. I built a new routine. I spent time with my children. I watched my grandbabies grow. And I realized something that still makes me emotional. I had not been difficult. I had not been weak. I had not been asking for too much. I had simply spent too many years in a place that gave too little. My supervisor thought he was calling back an employee. He was actually calling a woman who had finally chosen herself. And I would choose myself again tomorrow. Moral lesson. The lesson of this story is simple. Never give lifelong loyalty to people who only value you when they need you. A job can be important. A paycheck matters. Responsibility matters. But your peace matters too. Too many people stay in toxic workplaces because they have already spent years there. They think leaving means those years were wasted. But leaving does not waste the past. Staying miserable wastes the future. A company can replace your position. A bad boss can find another person to control. A toxic workplace can continue being toxic long after you are gone. But your time does not come back. Your health does not always come back. The family moments you miss do not come back. Sometimes the best revenge is not loud. It is not shouting. It is not exposing everyone. It is not begging people to finally understand your worth. Sometimes the best revenge is quietly building a life so peaceful that when the people who mistreated you call, you can smile and say, "I'm not coming back." Choose peace. Choose dignity. Choose yourself.